The first time my neighbor mentioned something I never told him, I laughed it off. The second time, I started feeling uncomfortable. The third time, I realized he knew things about me that he shouldn't have known. I had just moved into a small house in a quiet neighborhood after getting my first full-time job. Most of the people on the street were older, and everyone seemed friendly but kept to themselves. The neighbor across the street introduced himself as Mark. He seemed nice enough. He was probably in his 40s and spent most of his time working in his garage. One afternoon, while I was carrying boxes inside, he walked over. "Need any help?" I thanked him and told him I was almost finished. "No problem," he said. "It's good to have someone looking out for you around here." I didn't think much of it. A few weeks later, I came home from work around midnight. Mark was standing outside near his mailbox. I waved and went inside. The next morning, he stopped me. "Late night?" I looked at him. "Yeah. Had some work to finish." He nodded. "Saw your lights on around midnight." That bothered me a little, but I ignored it. A few days later, I was talking to my sister on the phone in my kitchen. I mentioned that I was thinking about getting a dog because I didn't like being alone at night. The next morning, Mark brought it up. "You should get a big dog if you're worried about security." I stared at him. "I didn't tell you I was getting a dog," he smiled. "I hear things." Small neighborhood. I laughed awkwardly and walked away. After that, I started paying attention. Whenever I left for work, Mark seemed to be outside. Whenever I came home, he somehow knew. Then one night, I decided to test it. I turned off every light except the lamp in my bedroom and went to bed. Around midnight, I heard something outside. I looked through my blinds. Someone was standing near the side of my house. I grabbed my phone and called the police. The person disappeared before officers arrived. They searched the yard and found nothing. But the next day, they reviewed footage from a neighbor's security camera. The person had been walking around my property several times. It was Mark. The police searched his garage and found a notebook. It contained names, addresses, work schedules, and notes about people throughout the neighborhood. My name appeared several times. One page had my daily schedule written down. I moved out a few weeks later. About 2 months afterward, I received a letter at my new address. There was no return address. Inside was one sentence. "I hope your new neighbors look out for you." I never told Mark where I moved. To this day, I still don't know how he found me. For months, I thought the man living next to me was simply antisocial. I barely saw him leave his apartment, and whenever we crossed paths, he hardly spoke. I didn't realize he had been paying attention to me the entire time. I moved into an apartment complex after taking a job in another city. My neighbor was a man named Daniel. The first time I met him, he opened his door only a few inches. "Hey, I'm your new neighbor," I said. He nodded. "Cool." Then he closed the door. I thought he was strange, but I didn't care. Over the next few months, I started noticing little things. Whenever I came home from work, his door would open a few seconds after I unlocked mine. One afternoon, I brought a package inside. Daniel suddenly opened his door. "New phone case?" I looked at the box. "Yeah." The package didn't say what was inside. "How did you know?" He shrugged. "Just guessed." That night, I started thinking about it. A few weeks later, a friend came over. We were watching TV when he suddenly turned the volume down. "Do you hear that?" I listened. There was a faint tapping sound coming from the wall between my apartment and Daniel's. 3 taps. Then silence. Then 3 more. I ignored it. A few days later, I noticed my doormat had been moved. I knew I hadn't moved it. I checked my door. It was locked. Then, around 3 in the morning, I woke up. My bedroom door was slowly opening. I froze. I hadn't heard anyone enter. The door moved another few inches. I grabbed my phone and called the police. The door suddenly stopped moving. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps outside my bedroom. When officers arrived, they searched the apartment. Nothing was missing. But one officer noticed scratches around the lock. Someone had been trying to manipulate it. The police investigated the building and discovered something disturbing. Daniel had been entering other apartments while their owners were away. He wasn't stealing expensive things. He was taking photographs. When they searched his apartment, they found hundreds of pictures of people in the building. Cars, bedrooms, windows, schedules. My apartment was one of the most photographed. I moved out shortly afterward. About a year later, I searched Daniel's name online. I found a news article about someone with the same name being arrested in another state. The picture looked exactly like him. But what scared me wasn't the arrest, it was the date. He had moved to that state only a few months after leaving my apartment building, and according to the article, he had been renting a unit in another apartment complex. I never found out whether he was doing the same thing there. Part of me doesn't want to know. When someone finally bought the abandoned house across from mine, everyone on the street was relieved. The house had been empty for almost 2 years. We were happy to see someone moving in. None of us expected the new neighbor to be watching our homes. The man's name was Chris. He seemed friendly at first. He introduced himself to everyone and even helped one of my neighbors carry groceries inside. For the first few weeks, nothing seemed strange. Then little things started happening. My trash cans would be moved closer to my garage before I got home from work. I thought maybe the wind had moved them. Then my back gate was open one afternoon. I knew I'd locked it. A few days later, I was watering my plants when Chris walked over. "Your fence is pretty old," he said. "Yeah, I need to replace it." He looked toward my backyard. "Someone could get through pretty easily," I laughed. "Hopefully nobody tries." He looked at me for a second. "Yeah, hopefully." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The following week, I bought a cheap security camera and pointed it toward my backyard. I forgot about it until my phone buzzed while I was at work. Motion detected. I opened the camera. Chris was standing in my backyard. He was walking toward my back door. I immediately called the police. By the time officers arrived, he was gone. They checked the footage and asked me if Chris had ever been inside my house. I said no. Then they told me something that made my stomach drop. Chris had been using a gap between several fences to move through people's backyards. He wasn't only entering mine. He had been walking around the entire neighborhood. The police eventually searched his house. Inside, they found maps of the neighborhood. There were notes about which houses were empty, which people worked late, and which homes had security cameras. Then they found a page with my address. Next to it was my daily schedule. 8 a.m. leaves, 5:30 p.m. returns. The final note said, "Wait until opportunity." Chris was arrested. After that, everyone on the street became much more careful. Months later, I was cleaning my garage when I found something behind a storage box. It was a key. I didn't recognize it at first. Then I realized it looked exactly like my house key. I checked my key ring. Mine was still there. I called the police. They told me there was no way to know where the spare came from. But I couldn't stop thinking about Chris's notes. He knew when I left. He knew when I came home. He knew where my cameras were. And somehow, someone had a key to my house. I still don't know if Chris ever got inside. That's the part that bothers me most. Because if he did, I never noticed.